Okay, well, awesome. Thanks for everyone for tuning in tonight. We're going to get started and start with the introductions. And if you guys just want to go around and sort of introduce how you came into your current positions and your roles and some of your clients that you've had, that would be great. So let's start off with Sean. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Sean Patrick Rhorer. I am dialing in from Richmond, Virginia. I work with management. I do management for Julien Baker. I also work with an artist named Quinn Christofferson, who is a trans indigenous artist from Alaska. And I work with a couple other artists. In that capacity, I also help run a record label called 6131 Records. And that's how I started working with Julien, was through the label first.
And Sarah, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Sarah Mary Cunningham, and I am the Vice President of Publicity at Columbia Records. Prior to that, I worked for an agency called the Chamber Group, and I was the publicist of record for OVO and YMCMB for many years. And before that, I worked at a corp comm firm, and before that I worked at Miramax and got fired from Miramax. And at the time I remember crying and being like, Harvey Weinstein doesn't like me, my career's over, but turned out that kind of worked out for me in the end. So I guess I always like to share that story, because just because one job was not the right fit for you, or maybe if you made a major colossal mistake and you think that it's over for you, times sometimes change. So I've been a publicist for many years now, and I do publicity, and I also kind of work on a lot of the copy for Columbia Records, and I also do kind of a lot of the lower level fashion partnerships. And then in my spare time, which is how I met Mia, is I do, I'm head of co-communications for She Is the Music, which is a nonprofit designed to bring more visibility and working opportunities for women in the industry, as well as help usher in the next generation of women. So that's kind of, I like to joke, that's like my favorite job, but that's me.
And we also have Lee. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, everybody. I'm Lee Doud. I am the head of events for JJLA. We're a live event production company based in LA. We also have a small office in New York. Some of my clients have included LA Pride, New York Pride, a lot of LGBTQ nonprofits, and we do a lot of talent booking in-house as well.
And we have Brian. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Brian Meiler. I've been at BMG for about a year now, and it's pretty amazing being there and having 15 queer artists that I get to just enjoy working with. Many of you might have known me from my Warner days or my Sony ATV days or my Word Record days in Nashville. I've been around, so you might have seen my name in something sync related or A&R related over the past 20 years.
And we also have Rick. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, hi everyone. I'm Rick Marcello. I am at AWAL in LA. I do sync, brand partnerships, and creative marketing. Some of the artists on our roster, some of the queer artists on our roster are Kim Petras, Girl in Red, Joseph. We also just recently signed Kai Dreams, who I think is really exciting. And if you all don't know them, you should certainly check it out. Prior to that, I was at Cobalt on the publishing side doing creative sync out of New York. And I also am the co-founder of a independent pop label. We call it a progressive pop label. It's a label that's built around really elevating, amplifying, and centering the voices of queer and POC artists. It's called Flat Pop Records. And we have two artists, Miss White and Shav.
And we also have Catie. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, guys. I am Catie Monck. I run publicity at Primary Wave Music. We're a publishing and management company. I've been in the industry for over 20 years, which just seems crazy because I feel like it's constantly changing and I'm constantly learning. We work with a variety of artists on both the publishing and management side, but I'm here tonight because of my work with Melissa Etheridge, who's one of our management clients. And I've been there and working with her for just over 4 years now.
And we also have Fab. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Hey guys, I am Fab Leys. I am a manager, an artist manager. I'm partner of a small boutique management company called Stillwell Entertainment, and I have been overseeing, I've been in the industry for some time as well. It's kind of crazy to think, since 2002. So I got my start working out in New York at a few labels, from Arista Records onto Island Def Jam Records in the A&R department. From there I was at Rock Nation, where I did basically day one of the company. I did an array of jobs because it was a startup. So I really got my hand in management at that phase. I worked primarily with songwriters and producers and did a lot of A&R and publishing, a little bit of artist management. Then from there, I went to Atom Factory, which is Troy Carter's management company at the time. Still did A&R, still did producer-songwriter management. It was in 2014, as I was leaving that company, that I was introduced to a young girl by the name of Hayley Kiyoko, who was, really trying to build her solo artist career at that time, having just come off of being sort of this Disney actress who had dabbled in music for some time. So I've been working with Hayley now as her primary manager on the music side since 2014. Since her start, and that has evolved my own career into more of an artist-focused management situation as well. So while my background is very much in the A&R space, I guess I could say I'm an artist manager. So here I am.
And last but not least, we have Casper. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Hello, I'm Casper. I'm the lead singer of a glam punk band called Telgate. So I'm speaking from a performer's perspective, I guess, here. As you can tell by my bizarre voice, I'm in the UK. I'm in Wales in the UK. And yeah, I'm in a all queer glam punk band. We're very eccentric in our looks, and we're very focused on queer activism. So that's my thing, I guess. I don't really do much else but yell on stage and tell people I'm here and I'm queer.
All right, so without further ado, we'd like to open some questions that we've prepared for the panelists. So if anybody wants to chime in, feel free. If you don't think the question pertains to you, don't feel like you have to say anything. So the first thing we wanted to ask was, what are the key differences in marketing efforts for an LGBTQ plus artist for their music or their tours? And are there key differences still, or have things evolved to the point where marketing is pretty universal for a straight or LGBT artist?
Well, I can, jump in, from the publicity angle. I think one of the most important things that publicists can do now, and I think that, prior to mine and Catie's time, you took a look at an artist and the label would say, this is the sound, this is the radio format that we're going for, and we are gonna make you fit that. And we, thank goodness, don't do that anymore. And I'd like to think that the most important thing is when you sign an artist, or whether it's a band or a person, is you need to sit down and say, what does your music sound like to you? Who do you think right now really loves your music, and who do you want to reach? Do you have a message? What do you want to tell us about the experiences in your life that have shaped you and your music? And to really kind of help people kind of craft their narrative. And then from there, you can go on. Like, I don't think that just because, somebody is pop or somebody has a unique fashion, that means that band or that artist has to become, a gay icon. Or just because someone is a metal artist or a death metal artist doesn't mean that he or she might not be, queer. I think that you kind of have to sit here and talk to people like, what is your music about? What do you dream yourself to be? Do you want to be a stadium artist? Are you more of like an activism? Is your goal to tour for a few years and then just become a songwriter? Like, what is your goal? And tell me about your narrative, and then help them kind of craft a narrative and then create a specific plan. And if that includes, you know, doing some marketing in the LGBTQ space, and you're going to do it with integrity, then I think you can do that. You know, I've had some artists say, like, I've noticed I have a lot of gay fans that write to me on Instagram, or I myself am gay and I read Out and I read Gay Star News and I want to be in those publications. So I think a lot of it too is to first sit and ask and then listen and kind of create a plan. Each plan I think should be unique for all artists. And I think more than ever, we have to kind of like understand that.
I think also, just to add to that from a publicity perspective, for Melissa, those outlets are just as important for her. You know, so whereas a pop artist, you might be thinking, okay, let's go to 17, let's go to Rolling Stone. You know, I have to really make sure that they're at the forefront, you know, the Outs, the New Now Next, the Glads, because they are such an important part of her puzzle, and she knows how much they supported her coming up. So even when we're doing a red carpet, you know, if I know that time is of the essence and I have to get her going, she wants to make sure that she hits those outlets down, you know, a little bit further at the end of the carpet that aren't getting the premier placements, because they were so important to her at the beginning of her career, and they're still very important to her now.
Yeah, for us at BMG, I mean, you look at an artist like Rufus Wainwright, and you follow Rufus. Like, he tells you where we're going, you know, and we support him as a company to go into whatever outlet he wants to go in and what he wants to do. And we have a metal, like a scene label called Rise, who has 5 queer artists on there. So they're marketed in their space with their genres and their passions and their worlds. So we're not pulling them out, you know, like a band. We have a band called Bloodbather that's on there that has a queer guitarist. And they know where they're supposed to go and the music that they're supposed to go. And then we also have LP. So LP, with her success, we just have an amazing ability to just follow what she needs to do and market her the way she would like to be. So that goes with everybody that we have. So I love that. It's become universal. It's just like our other artists. Everybody's just in what is going to build them up and amplify them.
I think what we see now in today's market, as far as music, at least in the last few years, I wouldn't say forever, you know, to go back to what Sarah was saying, is like, you find your audience the more honest and authentic you are as an artist. So, you know, and some queer artists may not be as comfortable in their own skin, talking about their personal life or their sexual preference or their gender identity. I think it's much more, the conversation has become more and more normalized over the years. But like, even, you know, 6 years ago when Hayley and I started working together, she wasn't out professionally. She was only out in her personal life, and specifically decided to include a song on her EP that had her pronouns in the form of, she was singing to another woman in Girls Like Girls, and it ended up being her moment that things broke. And it was like, up until that point, it was all like, I kind of want to fit into these parameters of what it means to be safe in pop music. And I think now that those, you know, we still have a long way to go. But I think that there has been a lot of progress in that. So like, if that's the truth to the artist, you just need to figure out the ways to amplify that and to create the brand around that without it coming off like, I'm just sounding the horn because I'm only an artist because I'm gay. Like, that's only one facet of somebody's identity. You know, it speaks to a lot of what their creativity is going to be about, but it you know, it shouldn't be like a box that artists eventually get placed in and stay in. So I think that's also something that we're all probably on this call collectively trying to figure out with our artists, is like, you know, yes, we get it. And we 100% support the community, do everything we can to surround that community, but how do we continue to grow that beyond so that it becomes more of a even more mainstream concept to have, you know, a gay artist who's outwardly so, and expressing that in their art and is selling out the stadiums on the same level, or still getting the same push at radio, at terrestrial radio and things of that nature. So I do think that you know, there isn't necessarily, it's not like, oh, we have to do things differently because the artist is gay. Again, it's one part of who they are. But if there's an authenticity to it and the content is strong, you're going to continue to find that audience, and you just have to keep building it with them. You kind of like, just like you said, Brian, like you follow Rufus, like I follow, you trust the artist to know, like, this is what my gut's telling me I have to do. This is who I am. So.
And I think, I mean, to echo what Fab is saying, like with Julien, you know, we had a really clear decision at the beginning of like, what is, you know, where does she fit? And I think, you know, we made a really decisive call early on to make sure that her positioning and the pitching around her and all of that was, yes, she's a lesbian, that's a part of who she is, but it's not the entirety of who she is. And that, you know, she doesn't just appeal to other lesbians or other, you know, queer people or whatever that might be. And so I think it is important to sort of like not make it, at least in her case, you know, specifically, it was like, we wanted to not make it like the whole of who she was as an artist. And I mean, I think one of the things that we've been really happy with is that she appeals to a very broad demographic, and it's not necessarily so, you know, overt in her music that she, you know, is interested in women. You know, I think there's a universality to what she does that we've seen, you know, I mean, straight guys love her music and straight women love her music. And, you know, I think that sort of is a really big piece of it for her, was that we didn't want to sort of pigeonhole it into this narrow lane of like, she has to just, you know, be for this crowd. It can be for everyone. And I think, you know, that if anything is a really, it was surprising to us as we did that, how novel that notion was, that it can appeal beyond just who she is and kind of a mirror reflection of who she is. And so I think that was a really big, decisive decision, you know, decisive move that we did early on, and said, hey, this has to be the way it is. And that informed everything that we did. I mean, that informed our publicity efforts, that informed, you know, who we worked with on tours, who, you know, every aspect of what we did with her went through that filter.
I just want to second, you know, what most of these brilliant panelists have been saying so far, which is, it's so important to really listen to the artist and focus on what's authentic to them. And, you know, I think in my work with really up and coming independent artists, sometimes it feels like the only way that you're going to get heard is if you are in queer outlets, or like the only press people who are going to get back to you are going to be queer writers. And, you know, we've been really grateful for that love and that support that we get from our community. But, you know, the flip side of that is that you find yourself inevitably getting pigeonholed. And beyond that, that your story starts to become sort of this redundant story based around the same question, which is, what is your identity as a queer artist? And I think, you know, sometimes as professional in the industry, the work that we have to do now, less, you know, I mean, it's great that we're all listening to our artists and trying to represent them authentically. I think that's the most important thing. But it's also important that we are working to create space for these queer artists to be marketed in new and fresh ways, to have access in, you know, press outlets that aren't just queer outlets, and to always continue to support the queer community through that work too, if that's important to the artist and important to the business that you're working in, you know, because it is important to, you know, if Them was the first outlet that supported you when you were an indie artist, like give them a cover piece when you're blowing up, you know. And I've seen a lot of that sort of that mutual support really is just so beautiful. So, you know, just something to keep in mind, that there's still work to be done for sure, but it's really amazing, you know, to hear that we're all on the same page about really listening to our artists. And also when listening to artists too, another important thing is that even in these queer outlets, sometimes there can be misrepresentation. Sometimes there can be sort of assumptions about, you know, who that artist is, or, you know, how they want to be spoken about. And so just as someone who's representing queer artists, who's working with queer artists, it's our job to make sure that we are kind of those gatekeepers and communicating with those people. Like if we're talking specifically about press, making sure they know what their pronouns are, what their name is, you know, what things they're comfortable with being talked about, what things are not comfortable with being talked about. In a lot of ways, it's up to us to help frame that narrative and to help carry some of the brunt of that work, because there's nothing more like awful feeling than, you know, being excited about seeing a press piece come out and then reading it and being like totally bummed out because they referred to you in the wrong way, or they hyper focused on something, or the headline said, this is a trans artist, or this is a blank artist, and suddenly you feel reduced to that. So there's a lot of different, you know, people who have to touch every part of that, but we just have to be very vigilant, I think.
Just jumping into that, you know, as far as what it means, because you guys asked in the question how it affects, like, if you're routing an artist tour. Touring is touring, right? But I will say that there is a certain level of care that we take, knowing that she's such a big part of the community, and that 90% of the people that are going to come to those shows they're human beings who are also, they have their own sensitivities. And so we actually train our crew, the venue, not extensivly, but all our merch sellers, they all know that, like, there's a certain level of kindness that you have to have when having conversations with people. Don't assume somebody's gender when you speak to them. Use very generic pronouns like, hey y'all, hey, don't call somebody girl, you know, because we don't know what anybody, when they're coming to that show, they may look one way and they may feel or identify something completely different. So I think that's the other thing, as far as, like, when she's out and when she's bringing, you know, people around her fans, she's also very protective of that. So I think that's the other side of it, is like, now you have this platform as an artist. You're providing the visibility for a part of the community that's been marginalized and, you know, put to the side and abused for a very long time. So, like, you have to be respectful of that community as well. It's not just about you now. It's like there's a bigger responsibility to the people that are championing you and supporting you. So.
Yeah, and I like the point that both Rick and also Fab, you touched on this too, is, you know, to do your research, because just because a website says, hey, we're a website by lesbians for lesbians, well, they might also have, you know, I had a publication one time reach out for an artist I'm no longer working with, and at first we were like, cool, but then we did some research and we found out that site had a lot of criticism because they were trans exclusionary, and this artist was not okay with that. So, like, after researching, I was like, you know what, I was not as familiar with this site. I spent some time on it and we came up with that, and so we declined, because this artist is like, I don't want to give my time, because I myself am not trans exclusionary and I don't agree with that, so I'm not going to do this website, you know. So again too, like, you always can take a look, and if you're not familiar, and let's say, you know, you're an artist signed on a small label, or you're with a newer management company, or like a friend is managing you or something, and you're working in this space and it's a new space to you, it's okay to also hire an outside party. You know, like, we had a song that kept getting synced with like a lot of pride activations, and it was really taking off, and the manager was like a little bit overwhelmed, and we hired a firm that specifically was an LGBTQ marketing firm, and they came highly recommended to us. They had incredible relationships. The staff was so wonderful. The artist bonded with the staff right away, and we hired them to help us work it to like specialty radio and help us come up with like club touring and a couple other activations, and they knew everything inside out. So I think it's like, you know, important to do that. And I also tell people, like, you know, if you have a lot of fans in that space, or you're politically active in that space, and you're interested in working, you know, with a publication in the LGBTQ space, but you yourself are not LGBTQ, it's okay to do the publication. Just, you know, I like to say, be a good guest. You know, in 1993, it was a seminal cover for The Advocate. The Advocate is one of the oldest it was mostly for gay men, but now it's all LGBTQ. It was one of the oldest and most respected gay publications, and Kurt Cobain was on the cover, and he talked about how he was into gay marriage, that he realized that when Nevermind blew up, a lot of the kind of people who were coming to the shows were the same guys that the jocks who beat him up in high school, and that he said that he had always wondered if maybe he was bisexual. He wasn't sure, that he had always sometimes felt very enamored by men. His first crush was David Bowie, but he wasn't really sure, but he did feel that like we needed to be better about, you know, the AIDS crisis was kind of still kind of picking up at in the 90s, and people were afraid to have these conversations. And he went on the cover as the biggest rock star in the world and just kind of talked about all of this. And he said, I hope those guys that beat me up in high school, or I hope the jocks that I see slamming themselves around in the pit at my show go buy this magazine. And I hope they flip through it. And I hope that they give their money to the Advocate. And I hope that maybe they read about a different viewpoint. And that's why I'm doing this magazine. And I just want to say, and he talked about all of this great stuff. And to this day, it's considered like kind of a seminal interview within Nirvana's like great catalog, but like Kurt willingly made that choice. And, you know, as a publicist, we would call that being a good media guest. So again, too, like anything from a club to a brand to whatever, just because they said some of this money is going to go to Trevor Project, or some of this money is going to go to like a, you know, a homeless shelter for those who are LGBTQ. We're like a site by lesbians, for lesbians. We're a site for, you know, trans people. Like, do your homework and really read and get the idea of like, you know, who owns it, who advertises there, who works there, what other work have they done in the space? Like, you know, do your homework. I know sometimes it's exciting, especially on the come up, when you start getting these offers and you naturally want to go, yes, 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 yes. But you have to kind of like do your homework and make sure you understand who you're talking to and who you're working with.
And for the next question, how much creative freedom do LGBTQ plus artists have now versus the last 10 or so years?
I can jump in here. You know, with Melissa, it's a little different because she does have such longevity in the music industry. So she does have a little bit more freedom to write the songs that she wants to write. Like her last album, The Medicine Show, it was really important for her to write the songs that she did, whether it's about, you know, using cannabis as a medicinal tool or, you know, being gay. So I definitely see that she has a little bit more freedom. And also she's kind of free from the normal, for lack of a better term, chains of the music industry, where it's like, sell this many albums, recoup, get to radio, you know, all of it. She's just so happy to still be playing music, and it's so refreshing. But that being said, she works as hard as ever. She works just as hard as a brand new singer coming up would have to work, because she knows how important everything is. And she's so knowledgeable on the different things that she speaks about that I never question if, you know, somebody wants to talk to her about cannabis, done. You know, if somebody wants to have her on Good Morning Football, yeah, because she will school you on the Kansas City Chiefs. So, you know, not to say that my job is easy, but working with someone like Melissa, she just makes it easy because she's making the music that she wants to make, and she wants to work. That's why when we were told no more touring, she was one of the first artists to get on her social media and just say, I'm gonna play for you every day. Every day I'm gonna play for you. You know, and she was doing it on Facebook, and now we recently launched etheridgetv.com, and she's doing 5 days a week. She's either doing a performance, or she's chatting with her wife, or she's doing lessons, she's doing meet and greets, and she's doing all those things because it's helping her as much as it's helping her fans. And I think that's so important for younger artists to see, like, your job is never done. If music is your passion, you have to keep it. You have to keep going at it. And I think, like, you can really look to her, because I look to her and I'm just amazed. You know, sometimes we'll get done with the press week and she's like, how are you feeling? And I have actually said to her, I'm embarrassed to say this to you, but I'm exhausted. And I haven't played shows on top of everything that we've just done this week.
And like, look at Rufus's career. Like, look at what he looked like in the 90s and early 2000s and stuff, and what he's doing now. We've talked at great lengths about how he feels so empowered by who he is as a person, that he can dress up like Anna Wintour in a video, or he can, like, you haven't seen the new video, but the new video is very interesting because he's done stuff in this new video he's never done before in this visual media. So he feels he has the creative. And our label, this is the first full record we've had from him, and we're just embracing it all. So I think that's amazing. And then if you look at like an artist like Luke Evans, who's the actor on The Alienist, just did a covers record with us, but he felt freedom in his creativity to do whatever songs. If he wanted to do a Cher cover, he's going to do a Cher cover. He didn't care. So like the creative freedom he's had is beautiful. And of course the rock guys, like they don't care. That thing about the lyrics, you know how artists used to be like, oh, well, it's up to interpretation of what it means. But now they can actually say, oh, that was about a dude I was dating, you know, which is, I think, fantastic.
Oh, sorry.
I think, sorry. I think I'd suggest as well, though, as a trans artist, I don't think that we have as much freedom, perhaps, as a general LGBT artist, so to speak. I feel a lot more under the radar with what I do, as in you could have an LGB artist or band, or even a straight artist or band present in a really queer way, like do a music video in dresses and things like that, and be quite applauded for it. Whereas I have to be a little bit more careful as a trans guy, because if I start to present in a feminine manner, which I often do because our band is very androgynous and glamorous in how we present, even though we're screaming in your face. But people will question that. They'll be like, well, why are you, if you're a man, then why have you got long hair? Why are you wearing a dress? Why are you doing this and that? And I also feel it would probably be easier for bigger queer artists, but for more grassroots queer artists, I think as well, we've got to kind of be slightly more accessible in what we say and what we preach. Kind of got to keep this, even though we're still being activists, kind of got to keep the straight fans comfortable, because, you know, if they start to feel uncomfortable, they move away from us, and then we don't have any way to build our platform, because we kind of need everyone included and on board, I guess. So that can be quite a shame sometimes, but I definitely do think that it's better than it used to be, but also a lot more queer fishing, I guess. And queer fishing, I would suggest, would be straight or cis artists appearing in a queer way, because it's what's deemed trendy, but actual queer people still being knocked down for presenting in that way. So that's kind of my 5 cents on that.
Awesome. So the next question we wanted to ask is probably more for you, Casper, again, but we wanted to ask, what does being an LGBTQ plus artist mean to you?
I'd say to me, I'm trying to be the role model that I lacked growing up, and still lack, I guess. I think there's not too many trans men, especially not non-conforming trans men, in rock music. And I just want to be the person that I wish I had when I was a child, really, and inspire people. And it's kind of a platform for my activism, I guess, through my music. Whereas I don't reach the same people through just purely speaking about my activism. When I'm performing, it's dragging in a different crowd, you know, the kind of the metal crowd, the punk crowds, the people that aren't usually in the queer spaces listening to that activism are listening to me then, and are being exposed to queer education. So I think being a queer artist to me is the responsibility of inspiring other queer people, and I don't know, just being what I wanted as a child.
Can I also just jump in really quickly, because what Casper said a moment ago to your question about there being creative freedom, I think is such an important point. And thank you so much, Casper, for articulating that so nicely. But, you know, when we talk about queer artists having more access and having more freedom, a lot of the time we're talking about that freedom and that access in terms of still what's deemed acceptable in a primarily heteronormative and white-centric society. And so a lot of the artists that we see getting elevated, getting amplified, having access to certain platforms and opportunities are exactly what Casper described. You know, people who present in the way that mainstream society deems acceptable for queer people to present, when in reality, there's no way to be queer. There's no one way to be trans. There's no one way to be non-binary. And ultimately the goal here is to open that can wide open for that expression to exist on that spectrum in its full manner. And, you know, I do think people, a lot of artists are having a little more freedom to express even in those areas through platforms like TikTok or through, you know, the accessibility of Spotify. And in some ways there's an ability to be discovered and still be independent in a way that there wasn't before. But when you talk about being in boardrooms and being in, you know, in the shop with those people who are making decisions, which, let's be real, a lot of those are still white men over the age of 40. And, you know, they don't understand what we're talking about here, or at least they don't make a huge effort to understand that. And that's why you see, you know, I even look at some of the artists that I work with and I see more straight artists who present in what's trendily queer than I do see genuinely, authentically queer artists presenting in what makes sense for them. So I just wanted to, you know, highlight that. I think it's incredibly important. Casper, rock on.
Yeah, just chiming in that the boardroom, the people that, you know, are behind the scenes, like they don't hold the reins. They don't have as much power in the creative process as they used to, you know, because like you said, Rick, like I could go right now and put a song up on TuneCore and I'm Spotify tomorrow, SoundCloud. Like there's so many ways now for these artists to start with their own creativity and get it out into the world. But even once you get, you know, once you move up within on the come up and then you get signed to the label, there's like little microaggressions that get said around me and like, you know, oh, well, it's gonna be another song about, it's another video with girl, like she's already done that. She's already made out with the girl in the video. And her thing is like, hey, like this is my life. Like I'm not doing this just to have like one provocative video and then it goes back into the closet for when it's useful later on. So it is very much like, yes, like I said before, like there is a lot more of the conversation is being had now where it's not so like, oh, it's such a taboo. And like back in the day, artists, you know, like Melissa Etheridge back coming out was such a thing. It was always on the cover of a magazine. And now it's less so that much of a sensational moment, but there's still so much that I've seen the LGBTQ artists that I've worked around face, even just behind the scenes, with continuing to be truthful to who they are and not being so concerned about who it's making uncomfortable in the, you know, the white male hetero, you know, she played her debut album for the DSP, the whole team. We were the only women in the room. So anyway, take with that what you will.
I think a constant reminder I make to myself when I have these thoughts like, well, is this going to make, you know, the cis-het dudes in the room uncomfortable with, or how many queer people in the room are going to feel really empowered by this? And I think that always really pays off when you play a gig or something along those lines and a young boy will message you after the gig and say, I came out to my parents as bisexual this morning after seeing your show, or people feeling inspired to be themselves. And I think that's the most important part of it. But then you've got to think of building yourself up as well. And like, you need to find a balance there. And I wish I didn't have to think that. I wish I could just be myself. And I do think I kind of am being myself. But, you know, there's always that debate in my head.
And
you know, there was a famous, oh, sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. The thing that we try to do with all the artists I work with, but, you know, specifically with Julien, was the team that we built around her was representative of those values. You know, like we you know, I'm a cis straight white guy, you know, and so like I'm kind of the only one like that in our team, you know, and so it's like trying to build a team around her that you know, from the tour crew to, you know, as many aspects of the as we could, bring that diversity and that desire for you know, elevating those the types of people that, you know, don't get necessarily elevated all the time, like into those positions, I think is really meaningful. And it's a really like maybe not so public way that you can still be really caring about these ideologies, you know, and making sure that, you know, not everything is like a post on social media or some performative act. It's the daily routine of how you're doing these things and how that can then, you know, again, it just is like you're doing it at every turn. It becomes innate to what you're doing, and I think that's really important.
Mm-hmm. And years ago, I worked with Joan Jett, and she was a real trailblazer. She was a woman in rock, with an all-woman rock band who wrote all of her own songs, and she signed her own record label because every label was like, no one wants to hear your music. And so she made her own record label with her manager. So this woman carried a lot of things on her back during like the heyday of bad behavior in the music industry. And she never liked to be questioned. And there was a story where a journalist kept being like, so are you gay? Are you bisexual? Like, you're a lesbian, right? And he was like, why don't you tell us? Like, like what? And finally she said, if you care so much, why don't you go listen to my lyrics? And if you listen to my lyrics, you will know about my life. I am a writer. I have written all my songs myself. So instead of asking me questions, go do your homework and listen to my lyrics. I lay it out really clear for you. And apparently years ago, she spit that out at a journalist. And ever since then, she basically, kind of told us, I'm not to be questioned. And if a writer wants to know more about my life, they should do their jobs as journalists and look it up. And also just remember, your narrative is yours. So if you feel like you don't want the word queer or, whatever put in front of your work, like if you just want to be referred to as a songwriter, I have written 10,000 press releases for Jozzy over the past 2 years. Like, she wrote Billy Ray Cyrus's verse on Lil Nas X's like multi-platinum Grammy sweeping track. I never write lesbian songwriter, because to us, she is Grammy Award winning songwriter and now Columbia Records recording artist. But Jozzy wore a suit to the Grammys and came in holding her girlfriend's hand on the red carpet and did all of her interviews with her girlfriend. We have done a ton of interviews with gay press. She writes back to her fans. She is not in the closet. She is not hiding her life, but that's not, I actually like to write Grammy Award winner as the very first thing I do to describe her, because Girlfriend has written 50,000 amazing hits for so many different types of artists and genres. So when I write about her, I write about her incredible catalog and her Grammy Award win and what she did for what was arguably the most talked about song of 2019. So again, if you want to be written about as, same thing, Orville Peck, I write a million of his press releases. I write country recording artist and songwriter Orville Peck. It is no secret that he is a gay man, but I don't necessarily always write queer artists. Like, I write country artists. So again, it's up to you. And then I've had other artists say, I want to be referred to as non-binary, so you need to put this in here. I want this in here. So again, like when you're looking at marketing materials, when you're creating flyers, when you're having a bio written about you, those are your assets that you own. Like, have it written the way you want. I had an artist who made it very clear to us with her boundaries. Like, people were very, interested. They were like, is this woman gay? Like, is she bisexual? Is that, there's this girl that keeps popping up on Instagram. Is that her girlfriend? And she made it really clear that her personal life is her personal life. And that was a boundary for her. She didn't want to be asked much about her personal life. So we didn't, because we respected her boundary. So again, too, like, if you have specific boundaries, that's fine. And just remember, like, your team is your team. So if you have specific things that you want in terms of verbiage, or if you have certain achievements that you want to be included, that is fine as well too. So again, it doesn't have to be like the defining characteristic of your verbiage for your narrative for yourself. And if you want it to be, great, then let's make sure that that's kept, consistent.
Yeah, and just to co-sign that, I know sometimes it might sound a little bit easier to be able to have Melissa Etheridge say that. But as a new and upcoming artist, it's not wrong for you to state your boundaries. It's not wrong for you to stand up for yourself. There's a difference between doing that and staying true to who you are, and then just being rude for no reason. If you're staying true and you're standing up for yourself and you're saying, you know what, I would appreciate if you didn't say this, if you said this, you have every right to do that. And you should feel safe and secure knowing that you should do that. And your team needs to also do that. Melissa, is very comfortable making phone calls for interviews herself, and I know that she can handle herself. Other artists might want me on the line, and I always like to see how my artists can handle themselves. But sometimes, yeah, I do have to jump in, or I need to follow up with the writer and say, you know what, that was inappropriate. You were a little bit out of line. Sometimes maybe I have to speak to my artist and say, maybe say it a little bit differently because I think he sensed a tone. But all of that being said, you still need to stay true to who you are and put up boundaries where you feel uncomfortable or not, or say, I'm an open book. Ask me what you want.
Mm-hmm. And that I think also should go for everything. Like, one thing I've definitely learned over the years is, like, we're not representing models. Very few of my artists are perfect sample size. I think I have 2 male artists who are male sample size. So it's like, I do updated size charts for my artists. Like, I talk to artists and I'm like, do we need to do like a limited amount of people? Like, I always ask, I'm like, if we're shooting in an open warehouse, I was like, I want a full curtained with separate walls dressing room to make these people comfortable. I want to say this area is the only area that we can do BTS. This artist is a vegan. This artist is, again, like trying to make situations comfortable. And especially I think for artists who are, I feel like artists who are women, artists who have fallen on LGBTQ plus, I feel like sometimes they have been unfairly forced to be visually represented, or they've had a visual representation forced on them. And maybe not everyone, wants that or feels, that comfortable with that. So again, too, I think we always have to work to make sure that like our working spaces, are like safe. And I think somebody brought this up earlier too. I think it was Fab, like when we're going on tours and stuff and looking at like, cities and states and counties and everything, and being like, is this the type of show where we get in and we perform and we have a security guard that they feel comfortable with, and then we keep the, we move? Or is this the kind of town that we want to spend the night in and have an off day in the next day? Like, not every city might be a safe place to have certain types of artists, might not be a safe place for them. So I think it's all those things that we have to think about, and that we have to ask ourselves, that we have to kind of build into the plans. And I think as you get bigger and bigger in your career, you have more of the luxury to sit here and say, I want this routing and this routing, and every other day is a vacation, and I need these 2 stylists, and we do fittings every couple weeks, and that this and that. But, again, still, I think we have to always make sure that like every working space is now comfortable for our artists, and we take these things into consideration.
I think that's a really strong point as well about not having to be so visibly queer. I think a big part of moving forward with queer liberation is not having to come out, really. It shouldn't be, you shouldn't just expect everyone to be straight and cis, if you know what I mean. So coming out kind of insinuates that before you came out you were just obviously straight or cis, and therefore it doesn't need to be a big headline if you're gay, and you don't need to be all over the place with rainbow flags all over you. If you want to do that, like I do, to be honest, because my thing is activism, so I want queer people to feel represented. But with some people, they just want to be an artist, they just want to be a musician, and being queer has nothing to do with that. And so they should definitely not be forced to be outward about it. And it shouldn't be such a big story if suddenly some girl's dating a girl. Who cares? Who cares? It's their personal life. It has nothing to do with what they're doing with their music.
And I think to that point, like, it's, sorry, Fab, it's, like working with Quinn Christopherson, it's like, when there's a headline that tags that, he's a trans man, it's like, he feels diminished by that. He feels like it's taking away from the value of him as a really talented songwriter and performer. And I think that, it's really important to Casper's point that, like, if you want to be the, waving the flag, do it. Absolutely. It's important. But there's also people who don't want to, and they need to be able to have the trajectory they want and not be sort of, kept in this bubble of a very specific type of artist they have to be.
I think it's a point as well, you don't really want to be represented for being trans. You want to be represented for being a good artist, and then sometimes it feels a little bit like a backhanded compliment when your most notable quality is just the fact that you're transgender, or the fact that you like guys and gals, and you know.
So this last question before we get into the Q&A is more about festival producers and talent buyers. How can artist representatives approach conversations with festival producers and talent buyers to curate shows?
Yes,
I guess I can start this one a little bit. I mean, I've worked with LA Pride for a decade now. This would have been my 10th year before COVID-19. And the one thing I've found to be really beautiful in kind of the way things have progressed in the last few years is we've been able to stack a lineup for these Pride festivals that have really allowed representation for all colors of the rainbow, for every inch of the spectrum of LGBTQ. What I have found to be really interesting and has been probably one of the favorite parts of my job is discovering unknown talent, people who may not be on mainstream labels and things like that, and they're submitting themselves to these festivals, sometimes without reps, but other times it's, you know, a friend of a friend knows somebody, and these reps are calling to try and get these artists on the lineup. So the conversations have been really open and amazing, and the lineups we've been able to curate for these LGBT festivals are incredible. I would like to see a little bit more of that in some of the more mainstream festivals. We earlier this year were supposed to do a Pride queer artist showcase at South by Southwest. And that was also just a really fun experience. South by was giving us the space and giving us just an amazing evening to really kick off music. And I think the more mainstream festivals are willing to like have an LGBTQ hub, I think the more comfort artists will feel in trying to pitch themselves to these festivals.
Thanks, guys, so much. So we understand we're running a little bit over, so if anybody has a prior time commitment, thank you so much for coming, and feel free to pop out if you need to. But if you do have a few extra minutes, we would like to take a few questions from the audience now. So again, if you need to leave, no pressure. We've had a great discussion so far. So the first question, I want to open Gabriella so that she can speak. Mia, can you unmute her, please?
Yep.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for doing this panel. My question for you is, what has been your favorite or most important project and why?
Was that a favorite project?
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, I guess for Melissa, I've had a lot across the 4 years that I've been working with her, because she does do so much. Probably one of my two top favorite, the first thing I ever got for her was booking her on Action Bronson's Ancient Aliens show, because I did not know that Action Bronson was such a huge Melissa Etheridge fan. And I was so nervous, but I was like, she has to do this. It's perfect. Nobody would expect it. And they became fast friends. And the episode was amazing. He wound up singing. They had a guitar on set. So that was probably one of the top two. The other one I have to say was Entertainment Weekly approaching us about putting her on the cover last year. because that, you know, I always love pitching. I love the art of the fight, if you will, where you're really working hard and you're following a writer and you know the stories and you finally get it. But the fact that they had been following her career and what I had done for the past 4 years and actually came out and thought of her to be one of the covers was just fantastic. And it was such an amazing day. And, you know, with it being World Pride, just everything about it was so, so special. So that's probably the top two for Melissa.
For me, I feel like every project I've worked on has been incredible because every project is a little different and you're exposed to different teams. And but I think the two projects in my life that have changed me as a person and taught me the most is I was Solange's independent publicist during her True EP, and then I was, when I moved over to Columbia, she happened to be signed to Columbia, so I was the lead publicist on A Seat at the Table, and that album taught me so much about race, identity, womanhood, about an artist putting out what was a benchmark album, a seminal album. She was talking about very painful experiences. She was talking about self-care, about growth. She traveled all over the world doing lectures. You know, there was huge performances, and I have to say, I learned so much from that project, and I don't think I've ever worked on a project that had so many incredible components, and for an artist that had so much to say, that literally that album came out, and within weeks we had professors emailing us because they were including it in their syllabi. So to me, that was, and it definitely made me have to ask hard questions of myself, and I feel like the arts are a very important way of doing that. Film, dance, music, a lot of times things that are not being covered in the media, or, you know, in things that we now look back in history and we're like, how could we have missed this? Music has brought those things up. Dance has explored those things. Film has. So I have to say the Seat at the Table era was something that I feel like I learned a lot from. And then I also think when I worked with Lil Wayne during his prison sentence and during his prison time, that was taught me a lot about racism, about the way policing operates. I learned a lot about the jail system. I learned a lot about, you know, just poverty, all sorts of different things. So, you know, again, you could be so different from your artist, but it's important to be an advocate and then kind of learn. And I think that sometimes every once in a while you're going to come across an album or a project or a time in your artist's life or a time in your company's life that kind of really challenges you to grow and kind of shakes you to the core. And there might be days where you feel so tired or it feels overwhelming, but those are the times when you kind of grow the most, and that's the time when you have the best ability to be an artist advocate. So those are always, I think, two projects that I feel like I remember every little detail, and like they'll stick in my mind. And like when I'm like totally gray haired and have a cane and like the music industry is now beamed straight into your head, I will always talk about those two projects. And unfortunately I have to bow out because I'm helping my single mom friend here with her nephew, and he's been like poking his head in the door and like bouncing off the walls. But these panelists were incredible, and the questions that I see coming through, and you guys were also amazing. And like, thank you so much for having me and for asking these questions and for all of us like being part of this. So just wanted to say goodbye.
Thanks, Sarah.
I'm coming. Oh, sorry.
For me, the first amazing project I got to work on was I was a producer on Last Call with Carson Daly, and was able to feature a lot of queer artists that I was a big fan of, and, you know, making sure the rooms were supportive and make sure the staff, you know, our people, our directors, our writers, everyone who had anything to do with the artists, to make sure that they knew everything about the artists and how to address them and get their music well known. And then when that show ended, I had to look for a new job, and I sought out companies that had a queer presence, either at the label or the company or their artists. So when I saw that BMG had like 15 employees and like over 20 artists, I was like, well, this is amazing. I'll feel supported that I can be myself, live my truth, stand up in the meetings and say, this is not kosher, we should not do this. You know, we should support the artists in this way, this and that, and whatever certain way. Like, those artists would never be on those TV shows. They don't support that. We don't need them, you know, that sort of thing. I love being in the room for that. And so those are the two big, I'm very proud to be part of these two big entities.
Yeah, I would say that my experience in being a full-time artist manager with an artist like Hayley has probably been one of the biggest achievements for me in my career. I've worked with a lot of very big name artists for several years, but to see somebody start at something that was like a seed, and then to watch it grow. And I think every, you know, goal or target that gets met, like you sell out a show and it's a 300 cap venue, you feel like you sold out the Staples Center because you're like 300 people care, you know? So I think none of it ever gets boring, or there's never like that feeling of being jaded. But I would say the most rewarding as a human being, the most rewarding part of what I've been able to do and I'm honored to be a part of is just to see how this person's music and art and honesty impacts people in a positive way, you know, to go out to see these shows firsthand, for when she meets these fans in these Q&As at her meet and greets, the amount of emotion in those rooms, and to see how something that, you know, you're in it and the artists are artists and they're all nuts, you know, on some level, like, no offense, Casper, but you know how it is, like artists are artists and managers are managers. And it's like, you find the way, you find the middle. And then, but when you go out there on stage and you see what what your art does for people, you know, we always make this joke when we work in the industry, you guys have all heard it, we're not saving lives, right? Because it's like, everything's a 911 and everything's such a big deal. But we kind of are a little bit, and to be, you know, the artists really are that. And so to be a part of that, to just sit shotgun, you know, to see that that's like impacting the world for the greater good, especially now with what's going on in the world and people trying to walk things back, you know, in the fight that's been happening for decades. And now it's like, oh, these rights might not be like, to just have all that instability, to know that like people can look to something and feel better about themselves is like I get emotional just talking about, like, that's the most important thing, to know that the human connection is there and alive. That's the most important thing. I love when she gets album covers magazine covers or an award, like that's incredible. But like, what's the legacy? What's the lasting legacy? And to see somebody that's been able to create that has been the best part of what I've done, hands down.
Awesome, thank you so much. So next I'm gonna bring on Jess to ask her question live.
Hello, can y'all hear me? Hi, y'all. Hi, Mia. Nice seeing y'all. So my question I wanted to ask for anyone is, how can we make sure that the LGBTQ artists are granted the ceilings that they deserve beyond Pride Month year-round?
You were cutting out a little bit. Could you restate that, please?
Yes, sorry. I'm in the car now. How can we make sure that LGBTQ plus artists are granted the salience that they deserve beyond Pride Month year-round?
I think that's a constant, personally, I think that's a constant, but you just kind of have to keep working at it. I think the music, the content, all of that has to speak to a greater audience. But I feel you on that, because like June, I'm like counting the minutes to July 1st, because from the minute, even with everything going on with, you know, the protests against racism and everything like that, there's still like a lot of stuff that happens during the month of June. And so I do agree that, like, how about we talk about putting somebody on the cover of the magazine in August and not just June, you know, like this bottleneck that happens where it's like, we're going to spend all of this 1 month highlighting people that are contributing, you know, that are a part of the community. I think that just comes with like continuing to put in the work and, you know, doing your best to stay visible and letting it speak to the masses. But
I completely agree. I think as well, like, as a queer person, to me, Pride Month doesn't really exist. You know, every day is Pride Day, not Pride Month for me. And so I think we need to stop seeing it as, okay, this is the month that we're going to load all of our queer media in, just as you said. We need to continue the conversation all year round, and we cannot be restraining to one tiny little month, because queer people always exist and we always need representation. And it's not just the queer artists that need representation, it's the readers and the people that are watching and tuning into your shows. They want to hear themselves be represented by these artists all year round. So I think, yeah, it's just not seeing it as this little bubble of 1 month, because that's kind of a capitalist thing, in my opinion. And it's just using us for some dosh. Instead, we need to be all year round represented. And if you have the power of being in a PR team or something like that, pushing that forward and that idea forward to people that you work with, I guess, as well.
Yeah, just to jump on the back of what Casper was saying, like, I mean, it's very performative in a lot of ways, what brands do and what labels even do during the month of June. And I mean, we're seeing a lot of that, I think, even in how the industry is reacting to the Black Lives Matter movement too. It's like, you know, put your money where your mouth is, like, show us really what you mean and what you stand for, because it's easy to highlight and spotlight artists when it benefits your brand, but, you know, what are you doing the rest of the time? And something that I found, you know, one of the reasons that my partner and I started this label, and why I, you know, manage 2 queer artists, and why I do the work that I do outside of my job at AWAL, is because there is so much work to be done. And in a lot of ways, like, it's up to us, you know. Unfortunately, it's up to queer people a lot of the time. And I see myself as someone who has more access and more position in the industry than a lot of the other queer artists and entrepreneurs in my community. And so it's my responsibility to create, like like in this case, creating my own business so that we can create visibility, so that we can prioritize these artists as just artists all the time. Because unfortunately, it's not happening outside of the month of June in a real way. I mean, I think, you know, little by little, and AWAL does a great job of that. We have amazing artists that we work with. I know a lot of you on this panel do as well. But I think there's a ton of work to be done, and it really is up to us. It's up to the people on this call and the people that we work with and we surround ourselves with to really put in the work to elevate those voices all year round.
I also think it's really important to remember that a lot of our pride organizations don't just host one festival a year. It is their main fundraiser for the year, but they're doing so much work outside of their Pride Festival. They're working for LGBTQ advocacy, for equal rights for people of all races. Like, these organizations are doing so much more than just throwing a circuit party. And helping giving these pride organizations a voice will also then subsequently help our artists as well.
All right, thank you guys so much for coming out and speaking on our panel today. We've had a lot of great panels, but honestly, this has definitely been one of my favorites. Everybody had so many great things to say, and we just want to be respectful to all the panelists' time. So we're going to wrap up now. But thank you to everybody who came and who asked questions. And yeah, we're just so thankful to have you guys working in our industry to change things for the better.
Thank you for hosting.
Thank you
So much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Lovely to meet everyone.
Casper, you're doing it. You're doing it. You're so eloquent and you spoke so well. Keep doing that. Keep doing that.
Thank you so much. Thank
We have
you.
more fans now. So I'm going to start listening to your music today.
Amazing. Thank you, everyone. Thanks.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks, y'all.
Thanks.